You guys when you guys like are getting into the media game, I know like you kind of are looking maybe at other people. Like I do this all the time. Like I'm looking at you, Jason, and honestly, I've heard about you before, Al, and I think it was like Pablo DeMario or whatever. Like sent me Al's number. It was like you need to call this guy, or I don't know if it happened the other way around, but I wasn't sure what I was gonna get. But like Al's the man. Like he's like a walking encyclopedia of wrestling. So how did you guys meet?
The internet is a wonderful thing because I remember I think I was doing high school rankings for Intermat. It might have been even before that when I had when Mad Talk Online was a Virginia site, and back in the mid and late 90s when Tom Owens had started Intermat and Joe LaRue had started the Mat. This is before they were in the various versions that they're in now. There was an email directory of websites and people had it. I think his was like SBC, like al dot coach dot something at SBC Global or something like that. It was
It was Coach Al.
yeah, it was like one of those like everybody has the at Comcast or at the whatever when you get your mine was at arrows.com, which was that 9.99 unlimited dial-up internet back in Virginia.
Nice.
But I remember just following stuff. We had California teams come to the Virginia Duels, which is an event I've been involved with since I was in high school. So we met early on, and then the dialogue increased when I started doing high school rankings at Intermat, and Al had been writing his stuff about the best tournaments in the country, and the relationship there with Wrestling USA, Amateur Wrestling News, Bob Prusy, and we all just kind of intertwined. So I ever had a California question, Al was the guy I was calling. Like, hey, we had Calvary Chapel coming out one year, and I was like, hey, what? Tell me about the Church Boys, so I could help. Ken Berger, our PA announcer at the Virginia Duels, and I was writing for the Daily Press, the newspaper back home in Virginia at the time. So basically, a lot of it was like a lot of fact finding and a lot of just question asking. Like, hey, I remember that kid from Fargo. He didn't place his state. What's going on? And he goes, oh yeah, that's so and so. Basically, anything I ever needed with California, Coach Al was the contact.
Those were good times, Jason. I remember doing that. That was at the period of time when I was starting with Bill Grant at the California Wrestler around the early 90s. And I made the decision that I wanted to integrate California on the sort of the national public square and just started networking and just trying to get our kids out there. And here we are 30 plus years later.
Yeah, I turned 46 this year, and I started writing wrestling when I was in high school for a weekly paper. When I was not talking like my school paper, but talking like the weeklies, and
Mhm.
when I was 15, before I even stepped on a mat. So, and then Matt Talk, the radio show launched in January '97. The website launched October of '97 when I moved into the dorms at that place in Norfolk, and it's just weird. It's like I'm doing the math. Like we're coming up on 28 years of Matt Talk Online this year, which is kind of crazy to think about. I mean, there's a little hiatus for the time there when I always still had the site up mainly as a historical archive for Virginia. I think the updates stop around 2007 when I was finally all right. I can't keep doing the Virginia thing and the national thing at the same time, but. Yeah,
Yeah.
you say 30 years. I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is my let's see, I was 50. This has been my 30th year in wrestling, which is crazy to think about.
I don't want to make you feel old or anything, but I turned 30 in November. So just for
You turned
context.
30? You're old enough
Yeah,
to
I
be
turned
my
30.
son.
Wait,
I'm
Yeah.
your
60.
your birthday. Let's see. So yeah. Okay. So I was in high. I always gauge it this way, Al. I don't know how you gauge when people think you're old or I think I'm old. I always base it around Nirvana's Nevermind. If you were born before Nevermind, okay, you're in my area. But if you're born after Nirvana's Nevermind was released, you're a kid. Like you just no, you have. That was like my formative album in that summer of music, that summer of '92. It came out late '91. Like that is like my formation of like from going from like Tonka trucks to CDs and Columbia House. So like that is kind of like my baseline of going from kid to teenager, and then that's like okay, that's when you're like okay, I'm watching, I can watch PG-13 movies without an adult coming with me. Like these are landmark moments in someone's life, and that's how I define whether I'm old or I'm not old is based on were you born before or after Nevermind.
That baby that's on the cover, they reshot it. So if you go on Spotify right now and look at the album cover, I'm pretty sure it's like it's the same kid, but you know
It
how old they
also
are
doesn't
now.
hurt that I'm a giant goofball, and that was also the same year Weird Al Yankovic's Off the Deep End came out
Mhm.
with the same type of cover. Thankfully, Al wasn't bearing everything, so Yeah, so those are the two album covers that I pretty much are synonymous with my youth is Weird Al and Nirvana. So
So, Jason, I started wrestling and getting into sport right when disco was hitting its fame. So that tells you a little bit. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
60
that when
years
they
old.
when they hit that seven, I listen to 70s on 7 on XM radio, and it's like whenever it hits the disco era, I'm like, let's next. That's
Click.
although I did see a all metal tribute to the Bee Gees live one time. It was a
Bee
band
Gees
called
are good.
Tragedy, and they were 80s hair metal style as a gag. They opened up for a band I used to follow called the Two Skinny Jays, and they were like an all metal tribute to the Bee Gees, and they could hit those high notes. And like I was like, you know, this is comically hilarious, and it's also musically good. So I was, so I have a little bit of a soft spot for the disco. That, and I hated playing YMCA when I was a PA announcer in high school. That was well, high school. I remember Jim Spencer was a soccer
78,
dad.
brother.
Loved it.
79.
I was like, and I hate it now. Although the hockey team that I used to work for back in Virginia, they had a guy, this older guy, and they'd play YMCA right around like midway through the third period. And this guy, I think his name was Grant Shaw, if I remember correctly, he'd get up and he'd do the dance. He was right on like a platform, and he'd have the place would go nuts as soon as you hear dun dun dun. Everybody would look for the guy. So, yeah, there's some disco in the background that I don't completely hate.
I feel like YMCA, like that's a cool song to play like at any kind of event though. Like it's very interactive, like people get engaged. It's got high energy. I mean, I'm sure if you're hearing it over and over and over again, it probably gets old.
Or if you're playing it, or I mean,
Yeah.
if you're from the era where you might have been conceived to it, I don't, hey, so we'll just
No, we've come a
along.
long ways, Jason, since those days. Yeah, there's been a lot going on here. Our capability, we used to depend on other people to sort of promote the sport through the newspaper. And then I remember Bill Grant, we were doing a newsletter. It was actually a physical newsletter. And I remember when the internet first came out, we're like, and Bill's old school. And we're like, no, Bill, we got to, what we do in a month, we can do in a day now. And now what we do in a day, we can do in a minute. It's just insane how fast the information flows. I mean, we can have daily conversations of what's going on with wrestling. And if you recall back in the day, it was like, did you hear about so and so? Did you hear this? No, I haven't read that article yet. Now it's like a constant stream, sort of overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, I sometimes look at I have a pile like the behind me. You can see these colored stacks. Those are old amateur wrestling news. It's going back to 1956. So I have about 50 years of them. And when I'll go back and look at them for I get asked a lot of questions like, "Hey, when was the last time?" and stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't know. Let me see if I don't already have access to it, or if I haven't already answered that question. Let me look, and I'll sit there and I'm thinking, I'll look, okay, this is okay. The NCAA's were this date. Okay, let's go mid-March. Okay, well, it won't be in March 15th because they were going on March 15th. Let's look at the issue afterwards. So you base the dates and the release date of AWN based on the event. You're like, okay. So it's just to think like, okay, what happened at nationals if you weren't there and you didn't catch the 30 minutes on Wild World of Sports, which was before my time, admittedly. I didn't start watching the nationals, I think until 99 was when I really started paying attention to college wrestling, even though it was around. So yeah, that's just even having run amateur wrestling news for 18 months a couple years ago, it was like, okay, how do we time this out for release on the right time? When's this going to hit publication? When's it going to be in the mailboxes? So the print, I came from a print world. I worked at a newspaper for 8 years, so soft spot in my heart for that industry too. And having run a magazine and then having been on the internet initially from the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
the way news flows is so strange. Now it used to be like you had to get the story out before, you had to beat the other website. Then you had to beat the message boards. Now you got to beat Twitter. And it's like or X, formerly known as Twitter. Those are just, it's like the recruiting stuff used to be so meticulous to try to keep up with. Now it's like the kids are just posting it out there and you're like, all right, go for it. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
talking about amateur wrestling is that's how I got into wrestling. I was at the dentist and it was around 1977, early 1978, and I'm waiting to get a cavity filled. And Dr. Sue, he was into wrestling. I didn't know that at that point. And there was this amateur wrestling news sitting in the waiting room, and I'm like, Mom, and I'm sitting there thinking WWF. I'm like, whoa, what is all this stuff? College stuff. And I said, Mom, can you order this for me? Well, that's where I got hooked, and then I got into the middle school. So that's sort of how I got to try. It was back when Dan Gable and all that was going on. So it was pretty interesting. So and I've gotten to write a few articles, the past several years with them. So it's sort of surreal. It's they were like at the forefront, them and Lanny Bryant and Cody and all them with Wrestling USA. I think it was called Scholastic Wrestling. I mean, back in the '60s. So
Scholastic Wrestling News, I think, is what it was called.
yeah,
And I know relation, by the way. I got that a lot when I was first breaking in. But
yeah, I
we
thought
ran an
so.
event with them. We ran the Dream Team Classic in Virginia back in 1999 with them, and got to know them over the years. Just great. I'd always see Cody and Lanny, I'd be like, Mr. Bryant, and Mr. Bryant. It's just great people, great people.
Yep,
So.
yep. So good times.
When you guys like started getting into writing and started covering wrestling, was this something that like, okay, I'm going to be doing this for the next 30 years, or was that not even like on your blip on your radar?
Not a
No,
chance. No. Al,
no.
what was your deal? What'd you figure out with it?
So I got out of the Navy. I started going to college, and I was working on my first degree. And it's like I wasn't into writing. And then I got by, and then I got a job at the Livermore Laboratory and started working there. Well, I decided to go back to school and get another degree. I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to do tons more writing now. So that's when I started working with Bill Grant. I just said, hey, I'm gonna practice writing what I have. Someone told me, write what you have a passion for. Well, it just happened to be around the time I was working with Bill Grant and starting to do the articles with Wrestling USA, and that's where I practiced. And here it is today. I mean, it's one of my passions now. So that's sort of how I got into it. And plus, I just wanted to promote back then California to a level that was never done. I mean, Lynn Dyke, Bill Grant, all those guys did a great job, but I wanted to take it more on the national spectrum as I'm doing here in Idaho now. I think here in Idaho, I've written about 150 published articles since I started in just about 4.5 years.
Look for Coach Allen, idahosports.com. That's not, he'll text me, he'll Instagram me stuff, and like I'll see him in the news feed. So a lot of the times that stuff will also be in my newsletter too. So
Yeah, we
uh,
appreciate that.
that's something I like doing is I like finding that stuff that, the regular wrestling fans usually not going to come across. But my journey was a little bit different because I'd always want to be in sports broadcasting, and I've kind of given versions of this story over the years, but I never thought wrestling would be where I would see the world. I was the kid that would miss the bus watching Sports Center because I was a sports junkie. I wanted to be, there's Chris Berman, Howard Cosell, Vern Lundquist is my favorite broadcaster of all time. I always wanted to be on the sports broadcasting side. I wanted to be like Shane Sparks talks about Vin Scully and Bob Uecker calling games and like those iconic voices. That was what I wanted to be. And at some point I discovered this sport crazily enough and I was already announcing sports. I was announcing baseball. And see, by the time I was a sophomore, when I saw my first match, I did baseball my freshman year doing stats and announcing. And the idea behind that was to get an understanding of multiple sports. So I wouldn't be just locked into one and be like, oh, you're only this thing. So I would have a background in as many sports as I could. So I could be like Vern Lundquist. You can plug him in at NASCAR. You could plug him in at the Masters, SEC football on Saturdays. Like the guy was the most versatile guy. At least I felt he is the guy when it comes to sports broadcasting. 18th at now Jim Nance has got the 18th at Augusta, like a tradition like no other, one of those things. But and then I felt broadcasting and journalism and writing go hand in hand. I worked, right for the school paper. I talked about, writing for the weeklies when I had done the stats. The local guy was a guy named Marty O'Brien, still writing in the papers locally. Started giving me some, assignments covering like, some summertime stuff. I actually wrote a lot about girls fast pitch softball in the summertime, and then when the wrestling stories were, hey, you want to write this one? Because once I started discovering wrestling, and there was no rankings and there was stats. I was like, hey, this guy beat this guy. Let's find this stuff out. So ultimately, it was on the broadcasting thing and announcing 8 sports in high school, and just kind of naturally fell with it. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was the guy answering the phone at the newspaper, taking the scores over the phone from the kids. Like I used to be the kid that was calling him in, be like, yeah, I got a score. All right, go. Fire the line score out. 3 runs, 3 hits, 2 errors. Winning pitcher this record. This person standouts. Here's the all that type of stuff. And then I was the guy taking that, writing these little blurbs in the newspaper. And, eventually that led to a full-time position there, over 8 years. So, and then wrestling in between, start a website in between. And I was taking what I was learning at the newspaper. And then all of a sudden that's just, now I'm announcing high school tournaments on the weekend to pay bills and pay for my weekends and to some point pay some tuition. But, wrestling just kind of took a hold of me and took me away from a lot of that stuff. Even though in college I was still doing doing men's and women's college basketball, was doing baseball, was announcing wrestling, was announcing high school tournaments on the weekend. So if anything with the media presentation or production thing has always kind of been in my wheelhouse. Whether it's what I'm doing now is not what I pictured when I wrote my first story on wrestling or went to my first match. I didn't think it would take me to 30 countries and 4 Olympic Games at this point, but I had desires of doing those events, but
Yeah.
not the way I'm doing them now.
No, we're
Well,
lucky to have
you
you.
got a
Oh,
great
sorry.
voice for it too. No, you're good, Al. Yeah, it's like Jason, you got a great voice, man. Like I either your mic's really good or you just have a really good voice.
I'm gonna totally give the credit to the equipment. So
So that being said, Jason, did you being an announcer, did you ever have an opportunity to announce with the late great Ed Aliberti? Or
with him, no, sat beside him many a year. So I circle 2 events on my calendar that are kind of key moments for my career, not just in like getting into wrestling, but being able to write, being able to broadcast, being able to network. In wrestling, we're networking people. Like that's why for years when I wasn't actually actively working for anybody at USA Wrestling, I'd be in Fargo because that's a networking trip. That's where you meet everybody. I met everybody in the sport in Fargo. I'm coming up on be my 26th year coming up here soon, but it's the Virginia Duels. So that first tournament that go to that match. I've told this story too, where the match I went to on a Wednesday night. Oh, with my sophomore year. 2 days later, we're at the Virginia Duels. I'm watching in the stands, and this is the first time I had ever heard Ed Aliverti, and it was a thump and a thud. It's like Paul. It's just the way he is like, what the heck? What? And then
His
he did America the
pronunciation.
Beautiful before it. And I'm like, America. Like, what is this guy? And then the next year, I'm working for the student paper. So I've only watched it from the stands one time, and that was 1995. 96, I'm down in the media table and the head table, and I met Ed and Shirley, and Ken Berger started announcing with him shortly thereafter. So I'd be up on the table. Ed was great with his research, and so was Ken. But I'd always have some extra stuff because they're older guys. They weren't on the internet. So I'd go and I would be firing some more stuff. Oh, here's the latest national rankings. I'd be printing out Dan Fickle stuff from Wrestling USA Magazine, the rankings. Like, hey, here we go. I'd find anything I could and go here, and I'd be giving them. And I'd got to know Ed, a little bit. Ken and I really worked together quite a bit more. We worked the Worlds in 2015, but Ken opened the doors to get me to do regionals in the area and a lot of high school events because he had been he came in, started doing those events probably 10, 12 years before I did in Virginia and kind of opened those doors. And when, he's like, hey, yeah, I can't do everything. He started to say, hey, get this young kid over at ODU. He's pretty good. Give him a shot. So between Ed and Ken, I've sat next to him for years and, never worked with Ed, worked alongside Ed, but never had the chance to work with him. Worked a couple national duels with him in terms of like next to him, when I was at the NWCA. But ultimately never had the opportunity to share a microphone with him. The one opportunity I had to announce the Virginia Duels when he was still actively doing it, his wife Shirley had a stroke and Ed couldn't make it that year. And this is 2001. And let's see, let me think. 2001, I'd have been, I think I was 21. Let's see, I had just, or turning 21 around that year, whatever it was, whatever the math is. I was told there'd be no math. And I sit there and we're at the PWA meeting and it's like, well, Jim Casey's like, yeah, well, Shirley had a stroke. Ed's not going to be able to do it. Kenny's going to do the announcing for him. And I kind of raised my hands like, well, who's going to help Ken out? And like, I felt everybody kind of all at once just kind of turn in their chair and look at me. Like you could see, I could feel like 80 sets of eyes just turning and going, well, we were kind of hoping. So that's how that started. But yeah, Ed I would see in the lobby at the hotels in the mornings when those Virginia Duels after parties were kind of legendary. And so a lot of us would be coming in around 6 in the morning in our younger years and be like, I'd be going to bed and I see Ed up with he's got his runner's jacket on and his cup of coffee. He's saying, hello, young man. I'm like, Mr. Aliberti. So Ed saw me in my formative years. I borrow a couple things from him. There's a couple things as an announcer. There's things Sandy does that I incorporate into mine because again, to pay homage to Sandy, to pay
Sandy
homage
Stevens,
to Ed,
right?
the way I call a fall is the way Ed did it. The way I introduce wrestlers at the NCAA is like, and his opponent is an homage to Howard Finkel from the WWE. So there's a little bit of I borrow a little bit of what I liked from announcers from around the world. A lot of them are wrestling announcers that infiltrate my style. But Ed, he had never got to work with Ed, but knew Ed. And I actually did had a chance to interview him before he passed. I want to say it was probably 2010-ish, but when we were Kyle and I were doing Wrestling 411, we had a chance to talk to Ed, and it was weird. You know, the last time I talked to him was the last time I talked to him, which is always kind of weird to think about. But the man changed it up for everybody. He really did, because it opened the door for those of us that do this in sport to be a little bit more colorful. And there's I joke with the NCAA about this. They don't mind the dad jokes. There's an entertaining part of that role. It's not just down and distance. So, long story short, yeah, Ed was obviously he's not, I can't call Ed a mentor, but Ed was somebody who I definitely looked up to and definitely did pick his brain when I had given the opportunity.
So
He's
oh,
an inspiration, really,
yeah.
and I think I like what you said, how you kind of pull from different announcers, because I think as wrestlers, like, that's something that you kind of do. You see something cool that you like that somebody else is doing, and you try to apply it to your wrestling and make it your own. I had Adam Tirapelli on earlier, and he's famous for taking some of the Tom and Terry brands, like elbow pass, like underhook, kind of shoving and getting weight on that back foot and attacking. And he's like, I just made it my own. Right. And I think it's like you're kind of doing the same thing. When you think about I've gotten the opportunity to do some commentating for CCB. If you had to maybe go back to maybe a younger version of yourself and maybe give some advice when it comes to the commentating, what would you say? Like, what makes a good commentator? Like, what's something that you kind of got to have? Is it the color commentary? Is it kind of like being yourself behind the mic, or is it, maybe a certain way that you say something?
And this is my fatal flaw, and I still have this problem. You'll kind of run across this even in this interview. I sometimes don't know when to button it up and shut up. So, some in my early years, I'd be on a rant about something, and next thing you know, I'd be talking about college tennis, and I'm at a basketball game. So, you just being able to know to reel yourself in and take the criticism, but also go back and listen to yourself. People are going to tell you did a great job. You need the people to tell you, what can you do better? Not you suck. Don't, the people tell you suck. Okay, there might be some value in what they're trying to say. They're just not saying it right. Find somebody that literally okay, here's what I liked, but here's what I didn't like. So be willing to take that feedback and reach out. Like, I remember calling the radio station guys like, hey, or in the newspaper guys, I'd be sitting there writing my newspaper story, and I'd hand it to the guy from the Daily Press who, before I worked there, was like, hey, can you read this and give me some feedback? Don't be afraid to get that. And sometimes they're too busy. Don't be, you're gonna get a no as well. They're too busy. But when it comes to broadcasting, ask questions. Don't be afraid to try something. But also, the people that are watching the wrestling. You are the background. You are the add-on. You are not the show. Nobody's tuning in unless your mom is tuning in to watch the duel, to watch you commentate. Nobody's going to the NCAA's to listen to me. They're going to watch the wrestling. You provide that background. So don't be distracting to the point where it takes away from the experience of watching the sport. We love the sport. Don't make it not fun. So you have to find that rhythm, and sometimes you might only get one shot at that. And if you turn a viewer off with that, sometimes you might not get them back. But just be willing to try new things, see what works, and also know, to borrow a phrase from The Rock, know your role. If you are the lead guy, you are not, you're supposed to, and that's hard with wrestling, because sometimes you've got somebody that's sometimes never done wrestling, and then you have the former wrestler who's never done broadcasting, and they put them together. So from the color commentator's part, you got to do that research ahead of time. You got to say, hey, you can set me up and do this. I'll say this. Don't try to say, again, if you don't know a whole lot about wrestling, because I came in not knowing anything about wrestling, and now I tend to stay away from regional vernacular, so to speak. I'm not necessarily calling thing, oh,
you coffee grinder.
Yeah, coffee grinder versus head lever, or it's like head lever, whatever. I don't get into those types of discussions. But although, to Shane's point, a coffee grinder is an appliance. You apply it. So, sorry,
there's an argument for everything.
Might be team coffee grinder here. I don't know. Might, because I live in the upper Midwest now. But again, it's ask those questions, work with your broadcast. Don't come in blind and be like, I got this. No, because even as good as you might be, your setup guy could be terrible, and you have to end up carrying the load. You got to know that. You got to be able to adapt. So early, there's a lot. And you know what? To be on a microphone and do this, you got to have some degree of ego. You got to be, yeah, I can do this. You got to be able to believe. There's that self belief that, yeah, I can do this. It's no problem. You got to get nervous, but at the same point, be willing to learn on the fly and adapt. And it's not like, I've only done it this way. This is the way I'm going to do it. That's tough. Well, that's not going to get you jobs moving forward. Developing that rapport with your if you're the color commentator, develop a rapport with the play-by-play guy. Now, if you're a wrestling guy and you've got another wrestling guy, you both want to call the action. You guys have to determine who is the lead. Okay, yeah, I've got my background is more in the stats. I'll give you the stats, the history, the last time this. And then whereas if I'm doing a broadcast with Jim Gibbons, I am definitely not going to go into technique at all. I am definitely not going to say, working that single leg, that's Jim's job. And that's what you got to do. If you're a wrestling guy, but you see, oh, it's going here, it's fine to bounce some of that off. Yeah, Jim, working the single leg here. What's he trying to do in this position? Or yeah, oh wow, working that power half. You can say the moves, just don't step on your color commentator. And the color commentator doesn't need to constantly say, 20 seconds ago, we gotta go. You gotta make sure that there's a balance there. So a lot of it, I think, is if it's a 2-person gig, it's rapport. Now, the more likely scenario, you're one person, you're by yourself, you don't have anybody in your headset. It's just you and a clock and go, and you've got time to fill with injury times and blood times. Just come prepared. I mean, those SID notes are there for a reason. And don't be worried about reading some things off that people already know, because there's going to be somebody there that doesn't know it. I mean, everybody in the building knows that Carter Strachey was a 4-time champ going in for his 5th. That doesn't mean you don't say it. Yeah. So that's one thing. You can pepper things in, because there's going to be people watching that don't know everything you know, and there's going to be people watching that know a crap ton more than you know. You have to find that middle ground too, and just be understanding that you're not the show. You can be colorful and entertaining to amplify what they're watching. You're not trying to amplify what they're not watching you. They're watching the wrestling. So those are kind of my tips in breaking. Why? Because I've made all these mistakes. I've made every single one of these mistakes. That's you're learning. It's a lot like wrestling. You learn more from your losses. Yeah, gut checks happen. They change how you do things. And there's some things that I don't do anymore that I thought were funny back in the day, because I was a brash 18, 19-year-old thinking I was going to be on SportsCenter, and reality is different. So don't be afraid to adapt, listen, and talk. I mean, and don't be afraid to try new things.
No, I agree.
You got to have that confidence. It's like you got to have that mix of confidence where it's like, okay, like I do know what I'm doing, but it's still be humble enough to where, all right, like I know what I'm doing kind of, but like I still need to get better.
Yeah, I've learned through my time do the podcasting. I know a lot of stats like you, Jason. I'm trying to teach myself to paraphrase. I mean, for example, he's a multiple-time All-American, which includes a Fargo title in 2010. Instead of just breaking everything down. And sometimes I have a tendency, my family came from the Azores to Hawaii, and they spoke pidgin. So I have all these crazy words, and they're like, and the kind and the thing. And I catch myself saying these things. People are probably thinking, what's he just say? So I gotta get better in those areas. More
yeah, I'm gonna give you go off.
Yeah, let's find an example here. So let me see if I can find I've got my Fargo database open right now because I'm working on that. So let's use Ridge Lovett as an example. Let's draw a guy in here. Let's do that. Yeah. So let's see. Let's find Ridge Lovett statistics from Fargo. So you could say he is, if my sort would work, this is bad podcasting here. So
Should we fill
He's
this
a 10-time All-American, which includes 2 national titles.
Well, he's a national champ at 145 in 2019, 2018. This is my high school database, actually. It's not my Fargo one. Yeah, so you got, post falls. You can say, yeah, won it at, 4-time champ, started at 98, finished at 145. Or you can say, in 2016, he was a 5A champ at 98 pounds, finishing 40-0. Then in 2017, he went 113. He won it there. Went 34-0. You could say total record. Yes. So this editing is a good example. And I realize that's the high school database, not the Fargo database. No wonder I wasn't seeing Ridge 10 times.
Yeah. I was just talking to Ridge yesterday. He's been at our national camp for Fargo Team Idaho. He's been doing some instructions.
He's phenomenal. He's really, just talking with him, I think last year in Fargo, he's just talking like how much he loves being around the kids and love being around the sport. Like that's a guy that I hope does something with like academy or does something in wrestling beyond, You know, I think he's too good. This is weird to say. I think he's too good to be a college coach. What I mean is he is too good for the sport. I think he has much more to give than coaching one team. I think he has something where he can, let's talk about like what Ben Askren did with Askren
Mhm.
Wrestling Academy. I think Ridge has that type of mentality where he has that knowledge and
Mhm.
that love for the sport that makes him infectious to be around. Like I would love to see him try something like that. And eventually, and grow wrestling in Idaho, grow wrestling wherever he ends up settling. That creates this push. We've got, look, Zach Dominguez in Nebraska's got this big club. Izzy's got in Illinois all these, the P&L clubs, for example. They all
Mhm.
started with people that like to give. They're not tied to one particular school. They're tied to an
Mhm.
area and a region. So that's where I'd love to see Ridge do that one day.
No, he's
I
done an awesome job at the camp, and he shared some things with me what he wants to do in the future. But I'll let him speak on that in the future. But the kids at the camp gravitate to him. I mean, we have multiple returning All-Americans that are in college now at our camp. We've had Bruce Burnett here this week. Adam Hall was here. We've had some celebrities in our at our camp, which ends today. But when it comes to working with the kids gravitate to him. They love him.
Yeah, I think that's cool, and I think that's super important if you're going to be that guy that is going to be somebody that is going to take on a club role. But I even think like sometimes we don't have enough big names or bigger personalities that take on bigger things outside of coaching. I think for people that love wrestling, that's normally where they go right after they're done competing. It's like, well, I'm gonna coach. One thing that I think is cool is I had Sky Sentez on. I was talking to him. It's like he's on this kind of brand new role where he's the executive director of wrestlers in business. And it's like I hadn't even heard of that, and maybe I'm just not paying attention, but I made an account and I'm like looking through it. I'm trying to figure out who's in Bakersfield that signed up and is a part of this network. And I'm like, how cool is that? Where he's not just like obviously doing some awesome things as a coach when he was at Campbell, but now he's like able to do some awesome things nationally. It's like we wrestling needs somebody like that in that kind of role.
No, no, I agree with you. That role and too, just going to the promotional, Jason. I mean, one thing I loved about your work, there's the attention to detail and it's thorough. You know how hard it is. I came to Idaho and Chris Owens, the team director of Team Idaho, has done a great job keeping the Fargo history. But as far as the history of college wrestlers or who's the All-Americans, thank you for that information. That being said, moving forward, who's going to replace us someday? I mean, there's a lot of podcasting going on, but who's keeping this history contained? That's the other piece of it that I'm really concerned about. Who's going to do the statistics and keep it going?
That's the one thing that I don't nobody assigned this to me. I don't actually
Mm-mm.
have an official role with the Hall of Fame, but I'll tell you right now, I had that database up. I just finished loading up all the 2025. Actually, I then realized I have one state to go. I load up all the state championship
Mm-hmm.
placements. So I scoured Track Wrestling and scoured Flow Arena and the various, websites that still do this. It's basically we're just down now to like two of them plus West Virginia does the old preferred educational software, but they still have a good site with, wvmat.com, which has been around since before I even started too. So,
Mm-hmm.
collecting those and at least having, I think it's just too robust for any one person to try to do every match of every result. But I mean, I think if I could pull this up real quick, like how many state results do I have in just 2025? Let's see. I have this list right now that I just uploaded has 214,724 lines of data. And that is every state tournament result from every state starting at 2013, just 2013. Now I have national preps placements going back to 1935, and then I have a 1998 year, and a lot of that too is coming from the work that other people have done, and I'm collaborating it or combining it into one area. So like Rob Sherrill does this American High School Yearbook. He did the actual binder version. Now he's putting it up on his Rockfin channel every year, and that's where I've got data going back to 1998 that I'm gonna search, replace, and craft into this database. So one thing I've done is, again, partially it's my own research, like, okay, I want to, how many state champs are at the NCAA championships? Well, now I can have that, but there's no place to know who's won every state title, who's got the most state titles in Oregon off the top of our head. There's no, to find that in Oregon, you got to go through the record book. And then there's no easy place to find it. So that's one of
Mm-hmm.
my off-season charges every year, is to take the high school results and put them together. And of course, I've got the placements from D1, from every level of college wrestling. So, um, part of me's taken that under my own understand, because I have a little bit more time, I think, because my full-time job is, wrestling and announcing, and there's that hockey world that's in there too, but for the most part nobody's doing it. And if I feel like if I don't do it, nobody is. And I don't know who's, got the nerdery I honestly, you got to be a stats nerd to want to do this. Like, I taught myself how to work on some MySQL databases. I don't know a ton about the queries. I know I can find what I need to find out, and I know pivot tables and Z lookups, X lookups, and all that stuff. But you got to have that degree of wanting to know. And we had Jay Hammond and John Harmon, Denny Deal. They've passed away. Gimp's still around. Jamie Moffitt's still around, but like, those guys they're getting up there in age. And I'm about to turn 46 in August, and I'm like, okay, who's behind me? So to your point, Al, I don't know. It's just, hopefully that we can come up with a place. Now there's, track wrestling, and the NWCA OPC has a lot of the old historical results from when they integrated with the NCAA, but they're still kind of pieced together all over the place. So I just
No,
I took
I
it and put it together. I mean, it's free out there. So it's on
yeah.
my Almanac site,
Oh,
almanac.mattalkonline.com.
awesome work, Jason. I
So it's
appreciate
there,
kudos.
but
Yeah.
now I will say I protect that data. You can't copy and paste it all, because I'm not just going to do all the work and have somebody copy it and rip it off. You want something like, all these states will reach out, hey, you got this? Yeah, I'll provide it. And then, with the Fargo Almanac, I put a document together that's, annually, here's the list of everything you need to know about Fargo, going back to 71. But again, back to the original point. This is what I was talking about earlier, about being able to know when to shut up. I've been rambling on about this, but I feel it's all ties together. It's just, I don't know. If you're out there and you're interested, reach out. I would love to help the next generation get into
Mhm.
to being able to. I mean, it's weird. It's data processing. It's not glamorous. I've joked that, my shows aren't as prevalent anymore because I'm kind of boring, honestly. I
don't think
really,
you're boring,
I'll
man.
sit there, I'll find a stat, and I work downstairs in my office here, and then my wife's office is on the other side of the floor here, and I'll have, so I just like, hey, I found that. Did you, like, in 1974? I'll find some weird stat that nobody's found before. I find that interesting.
Mhm.
10 other people might find that interesting. 18,000 people don't find that interesting. So it's like, you got to find, but it'll serve somebody, it'll answer somebody's question 10 years down the line, I guarantee you, because they're
Well,
going to
Yes.
know this.
that's why you're doing it. That's why you guys do this stuff. Is like,
Mhm.
you're not doing it for your. I mean, yeah, you
I
love it.
just
You like
geek out
doing
about
it,
wanting to
but
know more. I'm so far behind, honestly. I didn't step on a mat till I was 16 years old, and I barely, honestly, I was on the team. It's like, I don't to say I had a wrestling career might even be stretching it a little bit. I wrestled in the summer. I wrestled parts of 2 years in high school. Like, I was never a starter, never wrestled a varsity match, but I always had that. I like the sport, love the sport, and I can find stuff about every other sport when I need to. And ChatGPT is not going to help people out with wrestling results or history. So I, you know, I just want to know more. Like right now, I'm going to look at this. What result do I have on my? I can tell you that Seth Drennan from Parkersburg won the West Virginia State title 106. He went 38-11. That is on my screen right now. Why? So
yeah,
I don't know.
Well,
Maybe that kid will wrestle D1 one day.
yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, he was from Parkersburg. He won state titles as a sophomore. Like, who knows?
So
I'm
talking
not
about
sure.
Out on it.
No, I was gonna say, like, I'm not sure if we're gonna have a lot of people that are maybe jumping at the gun to do the stats and the history of how you guys are doing. But I think the spirit of what you guys are doing is giving back to the sport and trying to help other people. There's so many people that are doing so many different things that haven't been done before. Like, one of my favorite people is Brock Zackrell, who's like came up with a weight cut wingman. Like, I can take a picture of my fridge and it will create basically a meal plan of what I can eat based on what's in my fridge. Like, that's crazy. Have you heard about that,
yeah.
Jason? That's wild.
I'm
It's wild.
255 pounds. No, I have not heard of this.
But it's like a weight cutting app that he just like was tinkering around with. He made it himself. and
Mm,
like he's
jeez.
putting out different versions, and I recommend it to our high school guys, but it's like, people, he's not doing it necessarily to make a ton of money off of it. He's doing it because he loves wrestling, and he felt like there was a need there, and his guys needed something that he coaches at Clarion, and he's like, I'm going to come up with this app, right? It's like, how cool, how awesome is that? Right. So like people are doing different things. It's not going to be exactly maybe, how generations before have done it. But when you guys took over from the people that came before you, it's like you're not doing it the exact same, but the spirit of it is kind of the same. It's like you want to give back to the sport, you want to help others, and you want to provide something that's going to help future generations of wrestlers.
No, Bill
And
Grant. Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Jason.
Go, no,
No, I was
Bill
going to say
Grant's got a lot of knowledge.
Bill Grant preceded me, and he did a newsletter, and he spent hundreds of hours putting that thing together. And he did it because the newspapers weren't really highlighting what they felt needed to be highlighted. And then when I came, like Jason, we just had a different technology. We just grasp onto it. I mean, talking about Chat GDP, all the work I've done, you're the same. All the work I've done in California and in Idaho, if I go on AI mode on Google and just say, how many Fargo All-Americans has Idaho had in the last, 5 years, it will give me a summary based on all the work we've done. So it is summarizing it out there, but you got to put the stuff out there, and it has to remain on that website. If that website goes, then it can't get that data. Whereas your almanac is valuable because it can be a physical piece of data. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I've got it backed up. There's even another software developer out there that has basically I don't want to say, he basically has a ghost login to my database. So if something ever happens to it, there's a copy of it out there. The actual data. And then I've got it on I work on a Google sheet because Excel is obviously more robust, but I don't like using Excel in the cloud because I'm using, there's huge chunks of data here, and
Mhm.
so I tend to use a Google Sheet because I can go between computer and computer. I can work on it upstairs, come downstairs, and if I need to pull out certain data, I was like, okay, I'm only going to work in 2025. I'll pull out. It just is a little bit more flexible. It gives me the basic functions that I need, and it's much more portable. It helped me at the Olympics, for example. So in Tokyo, my computer screen just died. Like just and I'm like middle of the Olympics. I'm like, most people are right. Are you kidding me right now? Really?
Mhm.
And then thankfully Eric Olenowski had a laptop that he wasn't using. I just logged into my Google account. Boom, there's all my data again. So and when that was the list that had my pronunciations, which
Oh my
Mhm.
gosh.
internationally,
Yeah,
again,
especially the
database. Like I have a list. I have a sheet of 3,000 names with the pronunciations that I carry. I don't have to do this every single event. I've got them saved. So I just, match the entry list with the name. Boom. There we go. And so if it wasn't in the cloud, was in a Google sheet, if that was on an Excel, how would I, back in the day, you'd have to take a floppy disk and you have to,
Mhm.
I remember days people didn't even take laptops to the NCAA tournament. So, it's just having that ability to be flexible and where it goes. Now, when I first jumped into this stuff, like we had actually started the preview guide at the NCAA's, for example. We launched that in 2013 when I was with Amateur Wrestling News and the Open Mat, and then when that relationship ended, I basically said I'm going to do this preview guide again, and then that's where Jay Hammond, before he had passed away, had given me a copy of his NCAA Division One database, and that had a lot of the names and stuff. So I went through and then had to make it was Access, and it was Microsoft Access, which I didn't actually have access to. Pun intentional there. So I figured out how to read that data, get that, and pull it out, and then started saying, okay, how does this work? Matching names. Okay, my brain doesn't work with nested tables and stuff like that. It's like I need to see this data in front of me. So there it is, big sheet. Okay, where can we fix things? Where can we replace things? Well, we don't have hometowns here. Let's fill that in. So what Jay's years of work started with, I've just added on to it. Same with
Mhm.
GIMP with the EIWA database. Is like I've now got all the EIWA place winners, and I'm not taking that from anybody. I'm just building upon somebody else's work. It's a collaborative effort. It's not like I want credit for it. What I will say is when there's things that I've been adding to and presenting in a certain way, yeah, then I might want some time compensated for it. Or, that's where the preview guide is a paid thing. The almanac is a paid thing, but that time doesn't really get compensated any other way for keeping it up. But it's always been collaborative. We've always had a good relationship. It's not like I'm doing this. You see guys on the message boards on Intermat, like this cow cards guy and this wrestler knows nothing, whatever the username is. They're taking a lot of the same data and putting together different types of lists. And I'm like, awesome! I can do something like that and add it into the preview guide, or I didn't know that. Like, it's really good for trivia. So what it does is it also gets the younger people talking about. I'll use Gray Simons for an example. The guy who was a coach at ODU when I was there. Again, I didn't wrestle in college, but I call him my college coach. And he's one of the greatest humans as a person ever walked the earth. And then, but he's also a 7-time college national champion, and he gets left out of all these greats conversations because he wrestled in the late 50s, early 60s, made 2 Olympic teams. One Olympics, he didn't lose a match, but didn't medal because of the black mark system. Beat world champs. That was also an era we didn't go to the world championships every year. So you had one crack at it. And, guys like Greg, he didn't go to Oklahoma State or Iowa or Oklahoma, the powerhouse. He didn't go to Lehigh. He went to Lock Haven, which great wrestling tradition, but that doesn't have that's not going to win any online fan votes. I mean, you put a Penn State wrestler, an Iowa wrestler, a Lock Haven wrestler, an Oklahoma State wrestler in a poll, who's going to finish last? The Lock Haven wrestler, regardless of what their credentials are. So those are the things like it helps. The data helps sell the stories of the guys who came before us. Just like, Ed and Sandy and Don Blasingame came before me as an announcer, and Jay Hammond and John Harmon came before us as historians. There are Gray Simons who came before these guys as wrestlers. So it's the same concept. You talked about it earlier, Brian. It's like you borrow from the Tirapelli versus the Brands thing. Well, Gray Simon's techniques were learned from Billy Martin, who then taught another. I mean, there are people. It's just a line of progression, a generation, a bloodline of technique, and it's the same way with history. It's the same way with styles and predecessors and such. It's all important. It's if you don't know your history, you really don't know what your future is going to be either. I don't know if somebody else came up with that, but it sounds
no. I'm a history teacher, so I always talk about it's like a superpower to my students. Like if you can take something that somebody did well or somebody didn't do well 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and you can apply it to your own life. It's like you can obviously you haven't experienced all those things as a young person, but it's like you can learn it. You can be better. Just because you have that context of life.
What's the history specialty in?
So I've kind of taught everything. This next year I'm teaching U.S. and world history. So sophomores and juniors.
I'm curious. Okay, so and you're in the West Coast, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so where I'm curious because
are you going to give me a controversial question?
No. Okay. This isn't controversial. I'm curious because I grew up in Virginia. Right in the Hampton, Newport News area. So Jamestown, the historic triangle, Colonial Williamsburg and Jamestown and Richmond and the Yorktown. I mean, we used to drive through the Yorktown battlefields after school. I mean, like Cornwallis Cave is something that I'm extremely familiar with. There's a pub right down the road from it. So, that type of, then I come up here to Minnesota and a lot of in Canada, they say First Nations, here you get the Native American population. So where there's the lake names and such is kind of controversial. And I remember having a conversation with my wife one time. It's like, wait, did they ever have Lee Jackson King Day up here? And I'm like, no, that was a completely like Virginia thing that they threw on. They had Lee Jackson Day that they threw on to Martin Luther King Day. And I'm like, I grew up thinking that was the name of the day. And then I'm like, what happened to Lee Jackson King? Oh, that's just a Virginia thing. So the way history is taught some places can also affect your future. Like, oh, I didn't know this was a thing. Like, well, Minnesota didn't become a state till 1832, whereas Virginia was the first permanent settlement in the United States, Jamestown. And then people, Plymouth. I was like, well, dude, Jamestown, Captain John Smith, man, come on. First I watched Pocahontas, was like, whoa, there ain't no waterfalls like that in Williamsburg. I can tell you that. So I'm curious on the historical aspects of where U.S. history starts.
Yeah.
It's kind of like where wrestling history starts. I joke that, pre-flow is kind of a thing because in 2006, before Flow Wrestling, there wasn't a lot. And before the advent of Google owning YouTube, there was no footage online. So where does your wrestling history begin? As a history teacher, let's turn this around. You're teaching a course in wrestling. Where do you start?
Well, okay. Let me try to put this together in my brain. So where I start with U.S. history, so not wrestling history, where I start with U.S. history, I start with Thomas Jefferson, and we talk about. I show him this video, and it was during the Black Lives Matter movement, and there was a movement to tear down like founding fathers statues and stuff like that. And this is University of Virginia. And Thomas
Yeah, this
Jefferson
is
has
my
this big
wheelhouse, by the way. This is where I grew
Thomas
up.
Jefferson has this big statue, and there's these protesters that come on campus, and they're from like different groups. So there's, there's the riots that are happening in Charlottesville between, the Black Lives Matter people and this other group that's like members of the KKK and like the neo Nazis, and they're kind of fighting against each other. And we talk about that, and we talk about how this group comes on campus trying to kind of claim this statue, and like students on campus, like some of them know the history of Thomas Jefferson, and some don't. But they're like, this group is coming onto our campus trying to mess with our school, and we're gonna like stop them from doing that. Like there's no they don't understand necessarily why. All they know is that they're coming on their campus. And I kind of showed this speech, and it's about the imperfect pursuit of American ideals, and should we pursue those ideals knowing full well that equality is kind of a perfect concept. And it's like, if or is it possible to ever reach true equality? And that's kind of where we start. Right. So I'm trying to think like what is like a parallel for how I would start with wrestling. But for me, I think it's like, okay, there's this direction that we want to go. Right. And for a lot of kids, it's like, well, I want to be a state champ, or I want to wrestle Division 1, or there's this thing that I want to go. It's almost like this vision of my future. It's like, okay, well, this is what you want to do. For me, and this is something that in the last couple of years, I feel like I've kind of evolved as a coach, where we really need to focus on the process, right? And it's hard to get kids to get bought in on that, and most of them don't. Like they're still caught up, and it's like, oh, I lost that match, like I suck, and it's like, no, you're not that bad, like you're okay. Understanding that this is about getting ready for your life, and it's like you might not ever be a state champ, you might not wrestle Division 1, you might not wrestle after high school. But if you can take these life lessons, and this is a wrestling cliche, but if you can take these life lessons and you can apply it to your own life in whatever pursuit, if it's being a husband, if it's being a wife, if it's being a father, if it's, being a podcaster, if it's being a teacher, whatever, like then we've done something right. And I think, history has value when you put it into context. So I'm trying to think like what story I would tell, or, what I would put into it. But that's kind of the first lesson. That would be like the first conversation I would have with a wrestling class of students is, okay, like, what's our goal? What's our vision? Where we want to go? And then what that process looks like. And then what do you get out of it is the life lessons.
Okay, so to expound upon that point, the reason I asked this question is because I got into a discussion. It was pretty much an argument on the internet forums about eras
Nice.
in wrestling. So I there's the term modern era exists in Major League Baseball. I think it's post 1888. I think it's like, or 19. There's a modern era of baseball in terms of the uniformity of how the game is played. Wrestling has had multiple rule changes and rule sets. The time of the fall, the advent of the technical fall, things like that, going from time advantage to points, pin or nothing kind of thing. I look at it in an era, and I'm like, how would you? Okay, so maybe looking at this from a history perspective, I'm going to ask Al about this too, because both you can chime in here. It's like, how would you define the eras? Because I'm going to preface by saying we have the pre-World War II era, which is, obviously it pretty much defined what it is. Everything was 3 years. You didn't have 4-year eligibility. Then you have the post-World War II era, which you had the 1 year of the freshman eligibility in 1947. Then you didn't have freshman eligibility again until 1968. Or 69, because Owings was a sophomore when he beat Gable in 70. He qualified as a freshman the year before. So it was 68, 69, and that was like that fringe. Some schools weren't even doing it right away. So then I look at it, anything after basically post Gable era is how I'd kind of determine the modern era, the freshman eligibility era, the 4 year where 4-time All-American became a thing. That's how I would describe the eras. Pre-World War II, then there's post-World War II, and then there's modern era, which is, basically, for lack of a better term, post-Gable. How would you maybe put a de facto kind of line in the sand, be like, this is where this part of history has stats different from this part of history?
Al, you want to go first on this one?
Well, I agree. I go with the gay. I know a lot more after Gable. I've read stuff pre-Gable. I go Gable era, then you had Dave Schultz era, the Schultz era, then you had the John Smith era, and then then you come up to the Jordan Burroughs era, and then now we're in modern time. This is sort of how the blocks I break it down.
I think here's something that's very important to understand. Why I think in the last 10, 15 years, you see such an increase in evolution of wrestling. And when I
Mhm.
say evolution of wrestling, I mean just like not just the skill development, because if I want to go and learn something new about a particular position, I have my phone in my pocket. I can look something up. If you
Mhm.
go back, when did cell phones come out? Like early 90s, mid 90s. I don't know if that's right, but
I mean,
um,
Saved by the
the
Bell, Zach Morris had one early 90s. So, that was
but
kind of.
could he look up wrestling technique on his phone? I
No,
mean,
I don't think you could on the big brick phone.
No, it's a big
that's
brick.
honestly like that's got to be a separate era in itself, just
Mhm.
So the
because
iPhone
people
was
just
what,
have
08,
access.
09. I remember
Mhm.
Izzy had one at Iron Man, and I'm like, what the hell is a new iPhone, bro? I'm like, all right, yeah, I can't quite do the Izzy rasp, but yeah, I remember
What's
the first time I
what's
saw one was Izzy had one.
it's like Money Never Sleeps or something like that. It's not that. It's with Gordon Gecko, and he
Oh,
has
Oh,
like
Wall
the
Street?
sequel to
Wall
Wall
Street.
Street.
Yeah,
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 Wall
yeah.
Street
So I
Man.
know the sequel. I know the sequel. But the first one is like he
You
has a
weren't
cell
born
phone.
when the first one came
Yeah, I
out.
know. I know. The
Oh.
sequel's okay too. But when he has this like a phone on the beach,
Mhm.
and he's the man, right? But it's like this big brick phone. It's like I feel like wrestling has to have this new era where it's like kids have access to so much more. And what I think is great, because it's just like in the real world, it's like kids have access to so much information and technology, and it's crazy. But again, it's like you have all this information and that's knowledge, right? But how do you apply it? Well, it's like that's wisdom. So it's like, how do you apply all this different information is everything. And I think that's why it's even more important to understand the context of history. I think it's even more important that we have coaches that kind of help kids kind of navigate where to go, because being a good wrestler isn't just knowing a bunch of moves. Like being a good wrestler is I can go out and I can execute. I can go out and hit different positions. I can go and I can have a bad day and I can get taken down 2 or 3 times in the first period and still come back and win a match. And then if you want to get like philosophical, it's like, something really bad happens to my family or I get fired and I can still, figuratively wrestle through that. So it's like those things don't really change. It's just like how we message certain things to the kids is important. It's kind of crazy now where it's like we're in the Y era, and I think I know you're a hockey guy, so I always mess up the name. Quinnipiac.
Quinnipiac. Yeah.
Quinnipiac. I can't remember the head coach's name, but I've looked at him a couple different times because they just won a national
Yeah,
title.
Rand Pecknold. They
Yeah,
won a title not
yeah.
so this was my third year working hockey. So let's see, let's go. Western Michigan won it this year, Denver the year before, Quinnipiac the year before that. Yeah. So they beat Minnesota in overtime in 10 seconds off the
So,
face off. So
so I'll send you
cry face.
this
Sorry, Gophers.
podcast. I'll send you this podcast. It's Spit and Chicklets, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I'm familiar
But
with it.
I like I mess around with some Barstool stuff, but like his story of how he got into coaching is awesome. Because he started, I think he coached a couple years at a maybe a junior college or a D3, and then Quinnipiac was D3, and then they transitioned into D1. So it's a cool story. I won't go down the rabbit hole. But he talks about how, in the last 25, 30 years, he's had to change the way that he coaches, where he kind of has to be that arm around the shoulder and he kind of has to like talk to kids, and kids want to know why they're doing stuff, which for me, it's like, I think about my wrestling career and it's like when I was
My kids
younger,
want to know why we want to
I,
make their beds.
I remember my middle school coach. So I lived in Illinois before I moved to Santa Cruz in California. And I remember I started wrestling in sixth grade in Carroll Stream at J Street Middle School. And my coach, Brendan Doyle, told me to come into his office at lunch. And I was cutting weight and I had no idea I was cutting weight. I just did what my coach told me. He looked through my lunch bag. He pulled out a couple things. He pulled out my juice box. He left me an apple and I think a sandwich. He's like, "Hey, show up. Can you show up right after school into the gym and run a little bit?" I'm like, "Yeah, I could do that, coach." And I had no idea what we were doing. And I ran around the gym and there were a couple other kids running around the gym. And I'm like, okay, like everybody, this other guy's doing it. And I step on the scale and I had no idea even what weight class I was wrestling at the time. And one other coach was like, "How much did you weigh?" And he's like, "This." I'm like, and he's like, "Good job." And like gave me a fist bump. And I'm like, all right, and it's like, I think there needs to be an element of now where it's like, if a coach was asking you to run, it's like, why? Like, why would I run? So I think evolving as a coach too is like, you have to kind of have that softer touch with some of the kids where it's like you kind of have to be not their friend, but you have to talk to them in a way that they're actually going to understand what you're talking about and understand why a little bit more, which is totally different from how it used to be.
No,
That was
I
a
like to.
long-winded answer.
Yeah, I like. Can I share something? You're talking about how we learn wrestling technique. So I've been around wrestling for about 48 years. So this is how it's changed. That's why I broke it down in those blocks of time. In the 70s, when I started wrestling in middle school, our coach wasn't really much of a wrestler. He was a PE coach. He coached basketball, all the different sports. He actually had Xerox copies of technique, and he would bring it to practice and look at it and show us the technique. And occasionally we'd have a high school kid come in a room and sort of work with us a little bit. Fast forwarded to the 80s, we would film the 84 Olympics. And you're like, oh, how did Randy Lewis do that when he was wrestling that Japanese wrestler and he whipped him back in that trip? We would watch it and share the videos or get a video of Wade Shawley's talking about, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And that's how we were learning, and we'd share it amongst each other. And then you had the internet, where you start able to watch matches. Fast forward to today with YouTube, I can watch the Russian nationals. I was watching the Russian kids nationals on YouTube, and these kids are 8 or 9 years old, hitting gut wrenches like world class wrestlers. Like, whoa. But Buzavar Saitiev, who I had the honor of meeting when I was over in Siberia, I watched his technique, and you share it with the kids. So it's a real time now. So if you were coaching 20 years ago, took a break and came back today, you wouldn't, other than the basic skills, you would be lost with
Well,
how
20 years
much.
ago, we still had film, though.
I know, but the
Like
way
40
the
years
way the
ago.
technique is revolutionized, it's constantly changing, it's constantly revolving, it's getting better and better and better. Like Abish using some Brazilian dance, he incorporated into his wrestling. I mean, it's transforming daily,
Oh,
and that's the
20 years
difference.
ago, geez. So we're coming up on 20 years ago is when I got hired by the NWCA to run Intermat. It was 2005.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting there thinking about back we had in our premium service, we had video clips. But well, how did we do this? To crunch video, I had to take a DVD, which we had usually from our convention, which was
Hmm.
recorded off of VHS with, I think Gordon Connell had it, and he had the library of all the NCAA stuff. So I'd take that, I'd take it and put it into a CD drive and then try to rip that into Adobe Media Flash encoder. And you had several layers of Flash to build something that you couldn't just right click and save to you because you had to protect your content too. Because it's like, well, once you get past the paywall, you can just take it and share it, even though we're talking 10-second clips were like 10
Hmm.
megs back then. So just even I remember building a premium service library of technique from our coaches convention clinic videos, Jeff Buxton, all these guys. I remember going through everybody with Sammy Henson because you're not allowed to record Sammy Henson's instruction, but you'd sit there and cut them up. And I just remember being painstaking because Google, you didn't, YouTube existed, but it wasn't owned by Google and it was like limited, I think 10 minutes. So, and then the next job, Wrestling 411, you couldn't go more than 10 minutes. So we couldn't put our full show up. And now, you've got a 24-hour video of like stoplights or something on YouTube. It's like you can literally put anything up there for almost any amount of time. So
Hmm.
even 20 years ago, doing a video technique clip was painstaking, even if you had the technology. I think when Kyle and I talk about Wrestling 411 and the show we did our first show, the podcast 17 years ago. And it's like if we'd have had the technology that exists today, I mean, geez, you see the production value in like FRL or even like the podcast here. We were talking earlier before we started about Zoom, and I use Ecamm, and you can have, I've got a Stream Deck right here that I can hit and do all sorts of effects and things like that. You got a basically production truck on your phone. You have a phone app that can do it. I'm looking at a gimbal to go to Fargo so I can do some interviews when I work at USA Wrestling. It's like, okay, let's follow people around. I'm like, that's with AI tracking. I'm like, what the
Hmm.
frick? You're right, Al. You're right.
So
This,
Jason, did
this
you know?
era is unlike 20 years ago in every
Yeah,
stretch of the word. And
yeah,
that was that generation.
yeah. It's crazy. Do you know Doc Bennett?
Oh, me and Doc have worked together
Yeah,
for quite a while.
he lived here, right here in Boise. I'm good friends with him and Cliff Laughlin. Got to know them when I moved here. I mean, he was doing all that for years with USA Wrestling, doing all the videos. I mean, he was doing it like you were doing it. I mean, it was painstaking time, but now with AI, you can pretty much
And
it's.
Doc, I remember first time I really got to sit down and talk to Doc. We're at the Worlds in Baku in '07. First time I ever left the country, not counting walking across the border to Canada, which then didn't count because you did need a passport. First place I ever needed a passport to go was Azerbaijan. Go figure. I've been to, actually, this is funny. I've been to 4 former Soviet republics, yet I've never been to Montana. We'll figure that one out.
You
But
gotta go to Montana.
yeah,
Montana's
I know.
awesome.
I watched a bunch of Yellowstone. I need to go. No, I have some Yellowstone. So I'm sitting there. I'm sitting there at the. We're in these couches in the Hotel Absheron, which has since been leveled, and it's now a new high rise. Actually, stayed a block away from there the last time I was in Baku, which was I think 2 years ago. So we're sitting in these couches doing our work. It's the only place we can get internet in the hotel, and this is '07, and it's rough. It's to the point where I knew where the router was. I'd go and just unplug it and plug it back in to kickstart the thing. And me, Craig Sesker, Travis Shives, Doc would be down there working, and Doc's cutting up video. And what he would do is he was cutting up the video clips so the guys could then upload them to or transfer them to their video iPod so they could watch footage of their matches for like he had this whole library that was brought in for video iPod. Everything I know about like ripping video initially came from Doc with like Handbrake and programs like this. It's like regular people don't know about Handbrake. Like video people know about Handbrake, as an example. So Doc's and like, yeah, this is one hour video is 10 gigs. Like he's talking about these high PC cards they used to have with these cameras. And now a lot of that stuff is obsolete because this is before 4K. And now you've got 8K that like every 2 years something else comes out. I'm thinking about the 70-inch TV I have upstairs that was like $400. That we had a 45-inch TV growing up, and that thing was like a big projection. It weighed 1,000 pounds. Like
Yeah.
just thinking about, like I could lift up the 70-inch TV by myself. I mean, it's you don't really want to do it because it's a little off balance, but it's what Doc was. So the evolution of what Doc Bennett has seen, just on the video, just scratching the surface of what we did about video, the processing. I mean, and here's the thing: Doc has video nobody else in the world has. So, and it's like, and he can't release that because some of it's owned by, the IOC and some of it's, stuff he shot that's, rights holder media stuff. Man, Doc's library would be the envy of any technique snob ever. And just the knowledge that he possesses, and then to be able to take that, guy was an optometrist, then a wrestling coach, and as a, he was very responsible for getting Henry Cejudo into the Olympic Training Center as a high school kid. So that's another guy that you scratch the surface on Doc Bennett, man. That's be another great guest to have. Just to talk about what he has seen so much in the sport, from coaching at the high school level to basically creating Henry Cejudo at the Olympic Training Center. So, and then all the the video arsenal that he's got and what he did for all the athletes. That's one of those unsung heroes in the wrestling. What he did for all those national team athletes that nobody outside of 6155 Lehman Drive would even know about. Those are the stories that would be great to get him to sit down and talk. I interviewed him once when he went to the Hall of Fame for the Order of Merit. I don't think an 18-minute interview could even come close to what this guy has to talk about. So I'm really glad, Al, you brought up Doc Bennett because he's one of my favorite people in the sport.
No, I mean, when I moved here, I met up with Cliff Laughlin, who is, he coached Chris Owens, Idaho Falls. He was one of the Olympic staff, but he was good friends. He's good friends with him. And, we used to go out together and talk wrestling. And it was like, this guy was a breath of knowledge. It's like, he knows everyone around the world and he's been everywhere. So, great guy. So if you guys ever want to interview him, Brian, let me know. I can work on getting the contact.
Yeah, this guy'd be a wealth. He's got stories about wrestling in the NAIA back in the day at Jamestown. Like he has got stories on stories on stories. It's just want to. It's one of those things where you get a cup of coffee and just sit down and let Doc go.
Well, that's what's cool about even just what we're doing right now is like I just get to hear you guys talk. Like that's fun. Like I want to learn and I want to get better, and that's kind of the whole
This
point
is how
of
I learn
the podcast.
Same
Yeah.
way.
I do want to ask you guys this because and Al, you can chime in on this. We've been going for a little over an hour, and I want to be conscious of your guys' time.
That all?
But there's certain things, and like I didn't really get into this to be like a media guy. I more just like wanted to help more for me to learn and get better as a coach, as a wrestler, and kind of network and provide hopefully some connections for the guys on my high school team to be able to kind of go different places with college coaches. But I kind of got in this weird spot at Reno where Richie Figueroa entered the portal, and a Division I college, I'm not going to say who it was, but like had reached out to one of my friends to reach out to me to see if I had his phone number so that they can get him on a recruiting trip. And by that point, like things had happened so fast. It took me I'm like, dude, this is wild. Like, okay, yeah, sure. And like, I was able to eventually track down his number because I know somebody that wrestled or coached him at Selma, and I was able to get his phone number. But by the time I actually got that phone number to that person, He was already on a flight to Stillwater, and was in the wrestling room. I'm like, I don't think he's gonna go to your school, man. Like, sorry, but
I am rocking a little Stillwater here today. I got the
let's go.
yeah, a
Go
little cross clan
shout out Silly
ragweed.
Boys.
Yeah.
So my question is like, you know, it kind of ties into that a little bit where it's like you kind of get the inside scoop on some of these things just because either media or whatever. How do you it's almost like that kid in Almost Famous where he's hanging out with the band, right? It's like how do you kind of balance your maybe journalist slash media integrity where it's like, okay, like I need to tell this story versus, well, I'm kind of friends with these guys and I don't want to like burn bridges. Like how do you kind of balance those things? Because I know you know stuff that like that
I
would
want Al
shock
to
the
go
wrestling
first
world.
because I got a couple different things. I could spend quite a bit of time on this. It's Al, fire away on your perspective.
Yeah, usually if I'm going to network with people and it's a sensitive issue, like I'll usually contact the person themselves and say, "Hey, someone's trying to get some information on you or whatever." Yeah, you gotta be really careful with that and stuff getting in the middle of it. But no, that's about it. I try to keep it ethical.
Yeah. So, and it's also the line in that movie. I love that movie, by the way. It's like, here I am
Yeah.
telling secrets to the one guy you don't tell secrets to. Guess what?
Hmm.
We're a sport. We're a sport. And my friend Sarah Levin explains the sport pretty well. She goes, we're a family. We're a dysfunctional family, but we're a family. And you sit there and it becomes a situation where when you're new, you can actually kind of get that stuff. You don't have a relationship. So um obviously this is a topic that's been in the news recently with the student reporter at Penn State and how they addressed the Bo Bartlett Carter Starachi thing that came out just in the Daily Collegian. So personally, this is one that's close to the vest because you're been around at this point almost 30 years. I grew up with John Cerritos, who is the coach at Cal Poly. So, for example, I remember him coming through as a freshman at Bethel High School before he transferred to Great Bridge. There was the discussion about when he transferred about the lines in Virginia, like how did the eligibility work, and we jokingly call the transfer rule in Virginia the Cerritos rule because you have to live in the zone to go, and he wasn't living in the zone at the time, and that became a controversial thing. And I knew the intricacies of that situation, even though I wasn't the reporter. I worked at a paper, and someone was like, "Well," and they're like, "Hey, Jay, what do you know?" Well, I know that his sister goes to this middle school. He goes to this school, and it's like, and there's those things. Okay, here's what I know, and then we get in a situation where years later, okay, now I'm know people. Now I'm at the end of the Olympic trials in 2004, and I end up driving a van around with some pretty big names. And let's just say everybody in the van was not doing great things in that van. And it's like, hey, Bryant, you better not put any of this stuff on the internet. I'm like, well, okay, I'm gonna sell myself out because you got like no, because so there's that
Hmm.
there's a line eventually. And I remember asking Gary Abbott when I started working at USA Wrestling, it's like, do you associate with that? Because I don't socialize with the athletes. Because I got invited to one of the wrestlers' birthday parties. I was like, I wasn't in his department. I'm like, yeah, I'm recently married, about to get married. I'm living by myself. My wife is on assignment in Minnesota and Memphis back and forth for her job. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'll go hang out and socialize. So the lines you get crossed, it's like, okay, when you're there, when you're privy to something that may not be exactly becoming. And then they're worried about, oh, there's a writer here, there's a journalist here, there's a broadcaster here. Well, kind of, and I say this clear as a bell to define to DTR to define a relationship. Uh, you can tell me anything. Like if I have a beer, I'm off the record. Like there's lines that I'm not going to cross where I know you, we're doing something. This is personal time. This is where the lines get blurred a little
Hmm.
bit because people are like, why isn't wrestling journalists doing this? Because we're too close to the situation no matter what. I don't know. Let's use Carter and Bo, for example. I don't know either of them very well personally. I've talked to both of them sparingly throughout the course of their career. Other than, hey, what's up? Like I ask some questions here and there at a press conference. Don't have a personal relationship with them. Do, however, I've known Kale since we both graduated high school the same year. We're not friends. We are acquaintances. We I have questions for him. He maybe he'll answer. I mean, we see each other. We're friendly. We're not on each other's Christmas card list, but it's not a negative relationship. So the people expect a journalist to just disregard everything, every personal relationship they have. It's not about access or afraid of losing access, but at some point you are too close to a situation to equitably write about it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have a relationship with pretty much everybody in the sport, which pretty much disqualifies me from really ever doing any investigative reporting on this. This is where a lot of my stuff now is research and development and more or less Q&As. I don't, I'm not a journalist as much as I used to be anymore. Content creator is a term that's been thrown around a lot. So yeah,
Influencer.
there's that gray. I hate influencer. Sorry. I don't, nothing against the people that do it. I am not one.
Well, I
And
feel influenced by you, so
yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, influencers usually entertaining and engaging. I'm boring and statistical, but so I'm close. Like if I'm close to the topic, so let's say, um, I had wrestlers in my wedding, for example. So say if one of them get into some situation, I can't write that story. I'm a journalist, but like I can't write that story. I'm too close to it. The amount of personal relationships we have over the years, and that just comes with being around the same people all the time. It comes with sitting at the turf in Fargo until last call, meeting people and becoming friends over 20 something years. It comes with emailing people for 20 years about California statistics. It comes with your friends of a friend. There's relations. So many relationships really disqualify you ethically from being able to cover a story fairly. Then, well, where's the national media? Well, the national media right now is the counterfalls. This NIL thing just happened. Nobody's paying attention to niche sports right now unless there's a lawsuit or sports getting dropped. That's a blip. That's a brief. Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports is not paying attention to anything outside of the NIL and the House deal right now. So your national stories, Pat Forty and those guys at SI, they're not paying attention to anything outside of what is the national story. So that particular story, yeah, it's not being picked up because those papers also have to do their own research. They just don't take, oh, well, this paper reports this. Okay, you can say that. But it takes time to develop the story and the research and do your own research, to fact check and go through. And if people aren't going to talk, they're not going to talk. You can't bleed a turnip. Well, you got to go to the source. They're not going to talk. So don't make it, you can't bleed a turnip. So there are so many different caveats to covering a sport, especially like ours, because you're friends with a lot of people. And that right there is kind of to use, Al talking about being ethical. It ethically disqualifies you from being anywhere close to reporting on that story. I take the stories that with the newsletter, for example, if there's a story written out there and it's from a legitimate source, whether or not you agree with that source, I'll put it there. I do not share anything from Essentially Sports, which is AI garbage. I don't share anything from Sportskeeda, which is AI garbage. Some of those sports blog sites, I'm very particular with how there's like, I'll read. Nope, I don't think that's good enough to run. I wouldn't write that. Like with the Penn State story, would I? I put that in the newsletter. Story may have been a little. If I was a daily working at the paper, the Daily Press, and I wrote that particular thing, it might have not been ready for prime time. It might have gone back to my editor for another time. Another editor might have been different. So, again, the ethical thing of covering the sport that is your friends it's a line, and that's why, it's not like there is the part of if you cross Cale Sanderson, for example, and I'm using this as a hypothetical, probably not the best one to use, but given the current situation, if I write something there, I'm probably not going to get him ever again for anything else. That's the risk you take if you do it. But if you're also, we don't have the situation where we have, we're not paying, our salary is not being paid by, an independent media outlet. Flow Sports has media rights, for example. So there's certain things they're going to tackle, there's certain things they're not going to tackle. And a lot of that falls on the ethical lines. Like they know there are business relationships. So you want to have the access on one hand, and then you want to have you really can't have both. You can't really have those business deals and those personal relationships in a sport like this and come out with objective investigative journalism, because there's nobody that is so isolated from everybody in the sport to try to do things from a top down. And then your differences of opinion. Wrestling is very tribalistic. If it's pro Penn State, Iowa's going to hate it. If it's pro Iowa, Penn State's going to hate it, and Oklahoma State, you're going to look into those lines. It's like the political scene. It's like if this side writes it, you're going to hate it because you're from this side. It's the same way. So objectively, wrestling lacks the investigative journalism because we don't have the outlets outside of. I think there's papers in Iowa that probably could have done it because they're actual, like Des Moines Register, the Gazette, the Courier, those papers that actually pay people to cover wrestling out in East, and the Express Times and the Morning Call, they could probably do it. because they are separated enough from the players because their real job is reporter, not wrestling, then reporter. So that's a kind of a diatribe. And I think, again, ethically, I think there's too many lines that get blurred to really have one of us do that kind of story or do that type of investigative story. Now, there's also situations where your relationship, let's talk the other side of the coin, where it helps is when you have a relationship with somebody, it helps you write a story better. So take the controversy out of the way. Let's look at Mike Pasillo, for example. My relationship with Akil Patterson, he was a Greco-Roman wrestler. He's out. I cornered him at the World Team Trials. He says, "Hey, there's a big story, a big thing. We want to kind of have a story about. Mike Pasillo came out as gay, and the first NCAA champion to openly come out. And who did they trust to write this story? They reached out to me because again." I had a relationship with Akil that got me in the door to write that story. And I'd known Mike. We're not friends, we're acquaintances. But we, through phone calls, we developed the report. Okay, came comfortable having me write that story. That is where the relationships can come out with a personal interest story versus investigative journalism. So those relationships are what lead to, getting those breaks. Okay, I remember the late Alex Mead. His dad would, call me, "Hey, Al's going to commit." And I was like, okay, I'll wait for this for a week. And I said, no, I gotta beat the forums, So you get those personal relationships, which leads to the news breaks. So it goes both ways. It disqualifies you from being, equitable and fair because you're gonna be inherently biased, whether you want to believe it or not. I can be unbiased. You've got a relationship there. There may be a business relationship, a personal relationship. Your kids know each other. Your Facebook friends. There's something that's going to disqualify you from the gritty stuff. Then there's the personal interest stuff where those relationships open those doors to be able to write a good story, to get that great interview. I don't get Matthew Modine on my show if I don't know Terry Davis, who wrote Vision Quest, and I don't get through the door with Mario Lopez if I don't know somebody here. So there's relationships that do help on the journalism side, and they give you access to not just inside access on like, oh well, you can get inside access to Iowa. Oh, it's just access to a good person writes a story, and then the relationship too. Andy Hamilton helped me immensely with that Pasillo story because this was important enough to where you write this wrong, you are coming under some serious fire, and you don't want to be painted one way. You want to tell the story, and then that's where you lean on those relationships from other seasoned writers to help you navigate it. So relationships are everything in this sport. They are helpful, and they can also take you away from the not so great part. And that's the one thing we don't have: independent people in the sport. And you know what? That's probably, there's a reason for that because there's no industry that demands it. You got everybody looking at the First Take and Brian Windhorst for the NBA. That guy has contacts with everybody, but that doesn't mean he's friends with everybody. He's got his lines. And wrestling, those lines are blurred because we're all friends, and that's the hard part. So that's a long answer on two different aspects of the sport where the friendships and relationships can disqualify you and also lead to great stories along the way.
So I like to add to that. So Jason, you hit on a thing. I've done tons of articles on individual wrestlers, and I don't like that controversy. A lot of times we have hearsay daily. Hey, did you hear about this? No, allegedly it happened. You don't know for sure because of all the gossip out there. But a lot of times in my articles, I'll write about an athlete and they'll disclose some personal information about their lives. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to write that. I'll let you tell that story. I will allude to, so-and-so had their challenges during their childhood, but they overcame it through adversity and became a wrestler. You tell that in between story. Cause like you said, other people that may be related to that person that you don't know may have problems with what you write. Right. So it's a real sensitive thing. So I just try to keep it simple and to the point when it comes to controversy, let that person tell that story.
There's also a couple things too, like very, 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 very rarely have I let someone read a story before I release it. And the only reason I would ever do that is to make sure the facts are correct.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not changing what I'm writing unless it's a factual thing. So a lot of times, I sent it to him to make sure that it was all good. I never did that at the newspaper. I never do that at the newspaper. They would never do that to begin with, but that's part of that. There's the line, like it's for fact checking purposes. Like I said, if you disagree with what I wrote, it's still going to go in there. It's written, whether you like want to pull out of the, we've got an agreement. It's like, I'm not going to not run something because, well, you don't like how you wrote that sentence. So there's, again, having that newspaper training helps me in that regard, where a lot of us don't have it in the sport. That's the one thing
Mhm.
that's not a knock. It's a fact. Not everybody that covers the sport came through the traditional, hierarchy, the reversed, inverted pyramid of newsworthiness, who, what, when, where, why, how, huh, and all that stuff. I still use stuff I learned from my high school journalism class when I on the chances that I do write stories these days. So that's where it's difficult, because again, we don't have the market to have the watchdog individual that's like, okay, anytime there's a bad story, we got to put them on it, because they're just going to uncover everything. Everybody's just gonna open up to them, because nobody's gonna know. It's kind of disingenuous to say that, oh well, we have journalists in wrestling. That doesn't mean we're investigative. We don't have
Mhm.
any investigative journalists in wrestling. We're in a sport where we cover our friends a lot of time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ethical lines that are you have to separate it, and it's hard. And not all, some of us do a better job of it than others, and some of us are really, really good at it. Like I said, Gary is a PR guy, as a media relation. He doesn't have personal relationships with the athletes beyond his job. He says when he retires, I will then be friends with the people that I've covered for years. Or when they retire, like,
Mhm.
that's when they become friends, is when he's no longer actively, they're under his purview, for example. So that's a line of journalist. That's also a line of, public relations agent too. So there's a lot of different ways to discuss it. And, a lot of people that don't have the background in it don't really understand that part of it. And it looks like excuse making. No, it's just, we have a personal relationship, which in theory would again, it disqualifies you from writing it. I mean, like Willie's as well connected to anybody when it comes to the sport of wrestling. And he's not going to write this stuff because he's too close to him. Say something bad happens at Nebraska. Him and Brian Snyder are best friends. Willie ain't writing that story. He might put some stuff out, like he might, have a commentary on it, but he's not going to write a story on it and investigate anything that, this hypothetical world. If it's, say, I tried to dig in to my alma mater when they dropped wrestling, and they shut me out. They cut me off, shut me out, and blocked me. So even with those relationships that I had, nobody was talking. And now people are willing. It's been 5 years, and I've still got people that, like, yeah, they can't talk because they're still watching their email. They can't call or text me because they know that they're talking to me is not good for them. So uh, sometimes the personal relationships go like that too, especially when bad things happen. And, like, I'm persona non grata around my alma mater, because I again, having a personal relationship on one side of the sport that they cut, well, I'm done. They don't send me alumni things anymore. They don't send me calls anymore. They don't return my emails anymore. They don't do anything. So there's the good that comes with the bad. So again, those personal relationships, they go a lot of different directions with this stuff.
I think of when you're talking about Old Dominion. um, I remember Ray Blake was talking about when he was, I think, applying for the Stanford job, or was interested after Borelli had left, and they had brought back the program. And he's like, "Well, I don't expect to get hired, because you don't hire somebody that knows where the bodies are buried, right?"
Right.
Which he might have, I'm not going to speculate, but there is some stuff that's going on in that area. But it's like with Old Dominion, it's like, yeah, we're not going to work with Jason Bryant, like. He knows too much. He knows what's going on.
They paid for my show, and then they stopped talking, like, and some of that was so I was like, oh, I was part of that, trying to save the program. And then I was trying to tell certain, I want to use the word influencers, hey, back off, because we didn't want to, like, just piss off the administration to the point where they wouldn't even take the conversation with us. So there's a level of damage control. And again, there's that blurred line when there's something that's so close to you. Like, and I'll say this, like, I didn't write very much, if anything, about ODU. And I try, when you didn't, on my personal time, you knew that's where I went. You knew I was watching every football game. I was, there's a famous video with Andy and me at the Junior World Championships, like ODU beats Virginia Tech in football. I watched it from, like, a craft beer bar bunker type of thing. And I remember just Chris Perry was so pissed off the entire time at me, because I'm sitting there just watching the game. Yeah. He's like, nobody cares about your damn game, dude. It's just like I was really making it a bad time for everybody except for me. I didn't care. They were winning. And then, that was that, but when I worked the Nationals, you didn't know it. When except for the time when a guy hit the podium, Chris McCarty hits the podium, I'm the guy making that call. Like when Brian Hazard announced killing Cardinal from West Virginia, ODU,
Yeah.
refugee. He was his dad's college roommate. So like Brian's gonna get that call. So again, these relationships and things, it's just and the balance of where you are with like where I went to school. Like I said, I always joke that I don't care who wins. And now that I announced at Augsburg, D3s can be a little bit different, but again, I don't show any over favoritism for Augsburg when I announce at the Division III championships. I don't do Division II, so I can cheerlead for St. Cloud State. So we're good there. Little Rock, the first 5 years wasn't a player. So announcing the Nationals, when Stephen Little and Nasir Bailey hit the podium, they're my guys, they're my call. But again, they're top 25 program now, so you have to temper your pop on those to make sure you're calling them the exact same way. So it's not just journalism, it's in the broadcasting. Whereas, Brian went to George Mason, and a George Mason guy does some good, Brian's on the call. Or one of his kids wrestled at Air Force, he's got him. So again, the whole personal relationships run so deep in almost every aspect of this sport. Whether you're broadcasting, you're writing about it, or you're announcing it. There's a tie in, and then you've got to make sure the biases and balances are checked there too. So sometimes it's okay. I don't think anybody's going to care that it's a nice add on that Brian got to announce his buddy's kid hitting the podium. That's awesome.
And those are fun. Those are fun moments. Before we kind of close things out, do you guys have anything kind of last to add before we stop recording?
Well, you're talking about St. John State. So we got Draven Johns from Caldwell High School in Idaho. I guess he's committed there. So if you're watching that program, he's a pretty good kid. I think he wants to become a doctor, pretty decent wrestler. But no, I just want to thank this has been a good forum, Jason. I appreciate everything you've done for the sport. Appreciate you letting me use some of your data. It's really means a lot, and appreciate what you do. And same here, Brian. Appreciate the time on this podcast. I just love wrestling, and this is a good forum. So appreciate your time, both of you guys.
Absolutely. I'm going back through one of the last texts. The last two texts I got from Al. One is about Saxton Scott, and then that's one. And then we're talking about California Community College history, going through trying to find. I'm doing a research project on trying to find all the dead programs and what years they existed, and so we know how many programs we had at a certain time. So then I have a list of, hey, here are all the California Community College programs. It's like a list. The text is that long with, here's what we've got now. Here's what we used to have. So I'm trying to balance on, I think there were like 100, it's like 100 schools in the California junior college system. And it's like, I had 100 schools. Well, not all of them had wrestling at the same time. Those are the things I'm trying to nail down from a statistical standpoint. So there's that. My drop project I've been working on for almost 20 years. Again, I had a chance to cover the California community colleges for the first time this year out in Lemoore, and I had a great time. It's fun. It was so much fun to, that league has always been kind of intriguing to me. So I finally a chance to mark that one off the list of events that I've covered. Got to spend the whole weekend next to John Sachs and his wife, so we get to hang out, and have a good time, and finally got some In-N-Out burger, because you don't get a whole lot of that. It's okay. It's a good burger. I'm not going to say it's better than anything else in the world. It's a good, quick, clean burger when you want a good, quick, clean burger. There we go. I'm not going to wait an hour for it by any stretch of the imagination. As far as what I'm doing, we've alluded to it a bit. You want to read Coach Al stuff, obviously you're at idahosports.com, but nationally and internationally, I've done a newsletter for 10 years. It's almost daily. Sometimes I take trips. I was out in Universal last week in California, so I didn't do it a whole lot. I was too enamored with the Simpsons world at Universal, doing that whole stuff, like the Duff Beer Garden in Moe's. But and then my daughters love the Harry Potter world, so she got sorted as a Slytherin, so she's pretty happy about that. But yeah, so mattalkonline.substack.com or mattalkonline.com/news. You can sign up for free. There is a paid component to it if you want to support what I'm doing. Again, basically the newsletter each morning saves you hours of time. What it does is it gives you all the day's news and the links. I embed videos, I embed podcasts, so you can quickly go play it, whether it be Apple or YouTube. Sometimes there's Spotify shows and whatnot. I think most listeners like to go with the Apple route, but then you've got the updates on Ben Askren, for example. This week we got a new college hire at Northern Colorado, Tion Ware. All those stories, and then the international stuff. I find newspaper stories, I find press releases, I find social clips, video podcasts. It's almost daily. During the summertime, I'm keeping summer hours, so it's like, you might get it at 6 a.m. Central, or you might get it at noon because I was on a trip, or I had to take my kids somewhere. I had a doctor's appointment, so life gets in the way. But that has pretty much been doing it 10 years. So far this year, I've put out, let's say, I don't know how many. Yeah, it's almost at least 4 or 5 times a week. And if I'm going to be traveling, you're going to get a disclaimer about that again. There's extra stuff when you join the paid side of it. You get extra stuff. You get the stats dumps. When I find stats dumps, oh, you're gonna get that. You're gonna get some extra stuff. You can add free podcasts from the shows on the network. So MattTalkOnline.com/news. I've got the Fargo Almanac coming out soon. FargoAlmanac.com is the quick way to get that, or MattTalkOnline.com/Fargo. I got to make sure that that link works before the time this show ends. I was messing with that before we left. So those
you
really
have a
what I
few
do.
days.
Like I said, if you're in Fargo, come say hi. You'll probably find me at, I never, first of all, tip for Fargo, you're like, why aren't you at the turf? Okay. You never start at the turf. You end up at the turf. Okay. If you start at the turf, you're in for a long, long day. Okay. There's, you got to go to B-Dubs because it's a wrestling tournament, because you go to B-Dubs at wrestling tournaments. There's one right there. You can find me B-Dubs, Herd and Horns, usually the turf. Those are the 3 spots. So that's and of course in the Dome. I'll be there working for USA Wrestling with Gary, Richard, SJ, and crew. So that's where I'm at again. MattTalkOnline.com/news, MattTalkOnline.com for all the podcasts, and Almanac.MattTalkOnline.com for all the database. That's where I got it. Where you can find state place winners, Fargo, NCAA stuff. It's free there for you to use and utilize.